Traditionally, researchers and practitioners have used the business model as a tool at a single point in time to define various building blocks of the business model canvas, such as key activities, key resources, key partners, etc., that are needed to deliver the value proposition. However, this static perspective does not take into account the dynamic nature of innovation projects, in which the various elements of the business model can change. Therefore, a key question that arises is how to move beyond the snapshot in time approach of using a business model towards a dynamic view of business modeling.
To address this question, we focus on the process of defining and redefining business models over time, that is, business modeling. Such a dynamic approach takes into account that an innovation process consists of various stages, namely creation, scaling up, and sustenance. As such, a business model in an innovation process involving multiple stakeholders in big data healthcare innovations typically progresses through various stages that commence with the creation of big data healthcare innovation prototypes and then progresses to scaling up and sustaining the big data healthcare innovation. At each stage of this journey, only a specific set of building blocks play a role. For example, in the creation stage of the innovation process, all the building blocks except value delivery and cost coverage need to be considered. During later stages, all the building blocks need to be considered while defining the business model related to the big data innovation. But the scope of each building block changes. For example, the key partners, resources, and activities needed for the scaling up stage can considerably differ from key partners, resources, and activities needed for the sustenance stage.
Business modeling was first introduced during the BigMedilytics launch and was used on a regular basis to support pilots throughout the BigMedilytics project. The objective of business modeling has been to build awareness and expertise among pilot members as early as possible within the BigMedilytics project around business elements of their pilots, such as key activities, resources, and partners that are needed to deliver the value proposition. This business expertise complements the core expertise of pilot team members, who mainly have backgrounds in clinical, technological, and research areas. Each pilot team defined the business model for the first stage of creation, in other words, for the stage of developing prototypes and piloting such prototypes. In this first stage, the financial part is not the most important part of the business model canvas, as the development cost is covered by the BigMedilytics funding, combined with contributions in kind from the partners. In this first stage, business modeling helps pilot teams to think critically about the value proposition, which customer groups will derive benefits from the innovation, and what infrastructure is needed to create the value. As the innovation becomes clear and working prototypes are implemented in practice, pilot teams become aware of new value dimensions and new potential customer groups. Some envisaged value propositions may not hold in practice, and the business model needs to be updated. In this stage, we challenged pilot teams to revisit their initial business model, critically evaluate the initial decisions regarding the various building blocks, define investment costs and operational costs, and consider how such costs could be covered and who would be willing to cover such costs. All of this to start the pilot teams thinking about scaling up as stage 2 of the innovation process.
Ultimately, one of the key objectives of the business modeling process was the identification and illustration of a financially sustainable business model for the big data innovation developed within each pilot. We therefore developed an action plan template that focuses on the replication and scaling up aspect of each big data pilot innovation. The template focuses on the following 4 key objectives. The first objective being a potential action plan to sustain the big data innovation at the current scale, post current EU funding. The second objective being a potential action plan to scale up the big data innovation within the same disease and within the same country and the same healthcare system. The third objective being a potential action plan to replicate the big data innovation in other countries or healthcare systems. And finally, the objective, a potential action plan to replicate the big data innovation across other diseases or other conditions. For each of the 4 objectives, each pilot team was requested to provide the plan to achieve that objective, to identify tasks to achieve the objective, and to identify resources needed for completion of those tasks. Moreover, pilot teams were asked who could provide those resources and whether those resources have been secured or still need to be obtained. These action plans help pilot teams to achieve the third stage of the innovation process, a financially sustainable business model for the big data innovation in healthcare. The journey across the 3 stages shows that business modeling is a dynamic process. It is a movie instead of a snapshot.
The notion of business modeling, instead of the static business model, can help to capture the dynamic interplay among various building blocks of a business model during the creation, scaling up, and sustenance stages of big data healthcare innovations. Further, the use of the notion of business modeling also facilitates conceptualization of a business model as a complex system in order to better understand various changes in building blocks of a business model over time.